Well, it's about 12:01, so we're going to get started here. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. It is such a gift to be here. My name is Cynthia Schmidt. I'm the executive director of the Catholic Pro-Life Community in the Diocese of Dallas. We are the Diocese of Dallas's Respect Life Ministry. Such a joy to be here. I'm joined by Patrick Brown, who I will introduce in just a moment. Um, when this encyclical came out, we felt so bolstered in our pro-life views. We just have loved savoring all of the words. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity to talk about it with all of you and to share some perspectives on it. The first thing we're going to do is we're just going to start in a prayer. So if you'll join me, I'm just going to say, Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Soul of Christ, sanctify us. Body of Christ, save us. Blood of Christ, inebriate us. Water from the side of Christ, wash us. Passion of Christ, strengthen us. O good Jesus, hear us. Within your wounds, hide us. Permit us not to be separated from you. From the wicked foe, defend us. At the hour of our death, call us and bid us come to you, that with your saints we may praise you forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, so Patrick is a fellow in the Life and Family Initiative at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He writes a lot about developing robust pro-family economic policies and supporting families as the cornerstone of a healthy and flourishing society. So really squarely pro-life work. Patrick is widely read, and I tell everybody, if you're going to read one person in American, he hates when I say this, but I'm going to say it. If you're going to read one voice in American pro-life, it's Patrick Brown. He has been published in New York Times, The Atlantic, Free Press, National Review, Politico, National Affairs, Washington Post. I could probably go on. Where have you not been published, Patrick? We're excited that you are being published on this webinar today with all of our community. But most importantly, Patrick is a alumni of the University of Notre Dame, where he and I were in the same class, including his beautiful wife, Jessica, who's also an economist. So we are just so thrilled you're here, Patrick. Thank you for being here.
It's such a pleasure to virtually be in Texas. Greetings from South Carolina, and thanks for having me here.
Great. So we're going to set the stage for this encyclical. I know that most people on the call, you've probably not had the time to read this encyclical. And I hope when you do read it, you're able to marinate on it and just savor all of the beautiful things that the Holy Father gives to us. So we are going to unpack kind of the basic overview before we get into the pro-life angle here. Grateful for Patrick to help us do that. So first, Patrick, the context. So Pope Leo the 14th releases his first encyclical on May 15th, 2026. But what happened 135 years prior to that? And why is the date that he signed this significant?
Well, when Pope Leo XIV took that name last year after being elected Pope, a lot of people said Leo XIV, does this come from? And it didn't take people long to make the connection. Leo XIII, who was the Pope who really instituted this kind of tradition of thought that we refer to as Catholic social teaching, applying the theological richness and the principles of the church to the questions of the modern era and in a new way. When he was writing what he said 135 years ago with Rerum Novarum, which was the first sort of document that sort of embarked on this way of analyzing what the new economy and the things that were changing with the industrial revolution had happened and communism was burbling up and some of these things that were really transforming society in new ways. The Pope Leo XIII was offered some principles and some thoughts about how the church can speak to those times. And so Pope Leo XIV, now just earlier this month, uh, is recognizing that we're on the cusp of a similar revolution with artificial intelligence and everything that we're already seeing it change and grow and alter it and what it means. And obviously we can, I'm not an AI expert. I don't think you are either. There's a lot that we don't know about this technology, but we can already see it changing society in some really profound ways, and the potential for it to change work and family and life itself. Those questions are really big, and this encyclical is trying to weigh in on them in a really profound way.
And why do you think that, what a name, right? Magnificent humanity. What do you think the Pope is trying to do with even just that title in this technological context?
Well, it's funny when the first reports of this encyclical came out, people were, oh, it's going to be the encyclical on AI. It's either going to be the, clarion call for barricades to start, smashing the data centers or something like that. And the emphasis on this is less. I mean, there's plenty about AI, and there's plenty that we can talk about on that sort of technological limitations and how to govern it. And that's got a lot of attention, but it's more about how to be human in the age of AI and what it means to treat ourselves with the dignity of God's creation, recognizing that we are going to be very quickly in an era at which the things that we've always prided ourselves on as humans, our intellect, our ingenuity, our capacity to engineer and create new things, that might be surpassed by AI very soon, or at least pushed to its utmost. And so, what does that mean for us? What if we're creating these things that are sort of outstripping our previous accomplishments? Like, are they conscious? Are they changing our relationship to ourselves, to nature, to our God? And so that question of emphasizing humanity, in some respects, I think it sort of almost rubs some people the wrong way. That why wasn't there more emphasis on the need for redemption and sin and forgiveness? All of that is still obviously part of our Catholic heritage and teaching and all the rest. But to emphasize what is good about being human and the dignity of being human right now, I think was a really bold emphasis. And again, it was not a the Butlerian jihad like in the Dune novels. It was not a call to get rid of AI altogether, but was to an attempt to theologically explore what makes us unique as humans. What can we place our trust and faith in as so much is changing all around us?
Hmm. And he's using that evangelical language even in the encyclical itself, which you're so right, Patrick, that some people have said, where is the more robust moral dictates? But you're right. He's choosing to show the fragrance of the gospel and the beauty of humanity, in contrast to so many of the strange technological trends that we're seeing that we'll talk about. And the Holy Father starts this encyclical by giving us these two images. And I love that teaching element whereas going forward, we have these two images. What are those two images and why are they relevant?
It's so beautiful. From the first, literally the first page of the document, this vivid contrast of the Tower of Babel being this sort of technologically oriented goal that we're going to just put all society towards, and we're all going to be on the same page and perfect ourselves. We're going to reach this goal on under our own steam, versus the maybe lesser known story of the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem under the prophet Nehemiah, where he kind of, I would say, arguably kind of pushes some creative license, maybe a little bit, but sort of tries to emphasize the fact that this was a coming together, a common project, a place where men, women, children could come together and sort of give of their own gifts and talents to do that in a way that was not top down, uniform, sort of efficient in the way that the Tower of Babel is. And I think once you see that analogy of this sort of push for using AI and the sort of philosophy that undergirds a lot of it. And this may be something that's not familiar to some of the folks on the webinar, but increasingly, a lot of the people who are working on these questions from Silicon Valley are sort of enamored with this idea of we could use technology, we can use AI or whatever comes after it to sort of perfect humanity, to live decades longer than any human ever has, to optimize our lives so we're having just the right balance of nutrients and getting, hacking your sleep and optimizing your reproduction and all these sort of ways of turning being human into a science project, into having it be an algorithm that sort of produces just the right way to live. And whatever the spreadsheet puts out, that's how we should do it. And I think that's what the Pope is trying to caution us against in the strongest possible terms, to say, don't live your life by that mentality of being sort of over engineered in the pursuit of perfection, but rather embracing vulnerability and proactively seeking that relationship and interpersonal connectivity. that is what he's trying to contrast in these two biblical stories that I think are so powerful.
Hmm. I love that. He does do a little walkthrough of Catholic social teaching. It's kind of the appetizer course to get into this meat that we're discussing. Can you tell us a little bit? He talks about there's five principles that he talks about: human dignity, the universal destination of goods, the principle of subsidiarity, the principle of solidarity, and the principle of social justice. So the good news for everybody is if you, like me, need a refresher on Catholic social teaching, this is your crash course idiot's guide and kind of a great summary that the Holy Father gives us. I do want to talk about two of those I think are particularly relevant for pro-life. One is human dignity and one is solidarity. So can you give us an just like a little brief overview of what the church says about those two social justice principles?
Yeah, no, and I'll just emphasize, I think that the Pope did a real service to the church in his section there at the beginning. Just a very quick tour. It's very readable, but in case you didn't have a chance to take a theology class in college, or if you've heard these documents thrown around, you kind of know maybe some of these, just a very simple timeline of how the church has address these challenges, right? Religious freedom, the challenge of the Great Depression, what that did to the worldwide economy, all these pressures that have changed society over the last 100+ years, the church has been responsive to, and we entered into this new one. But to answer your question specifically on the principle, I think subsidiarity is one that really emerges from this document as being essential, and I think this is such this is something that the church is characteristically um, it is a characteristically Catholic element of our teaching that I think our politics desperately needs. And it's so wonderful to hear the Pope reemphasizing this idea of subsidiarity. And I think this sometimes gets misinterpreted in our American context as sort of almost like federalism in a sense, where we have the federal government, we have the state government, and like these two. It's really more about, rather than sort of devolving down from the top, it's really about respecting the autonomy of the lowest appropriate level of society. So what families can do for themselves, give them the freedom and support to do for themselves. And then things that families can't do, we have the community. And from the community, we build up to the city. From the city, we build up to larger forms of government. That idea of sort of like, reverse nesting dolls or something where the higher should never kind of try to superimpose its will on these more organic forms where we're living life in relation with each other. That is subsidiarity, and we can see that in action when we contrast ways of solving policy problems that seek to try to impose a one size fits all solution on a problem, as opposed to sort of capacitating whether that's church or charity or civil society or other groups to kind of solve their own problems and build up from the bottom up. I think those are that subsidiarity model is something that's so precious to us in our tradition. The other one I'm sorry, did you say human dignity? Was that the
Oh,
other
human
one?
dignity. Yes. Any
Yeah,
any of them. Any of them that you think are
all
particularly.
of them. They're
Yeah.
all so good, and like so there's so much richness in all of this. But I think I think the idea, especially in this document, about stressing where our dignity comes from, because you hear people, the Declaration of Human Rights and the United Nations and human dignity, where we can ground that. If we were to avoid what Marianne Glendon, who's a great Catholic philosopher of previous generations, referred to as right as talking about human rights as nonsense on stilts, if it's not grounded in this sort of theological understanding of the human person, because otherwise it's just competing claims. Well, I think I have a right to this. I think I have a right to this. I think my dignity is because I'm able to do this, or your dignity is contingent on being able to be self-rationalizing, whatever. Obviously, that's not how the church teaches. That's not what the Pope is saying. The Pope is, referring to Pope Francis, Pope John Paul II, all the way up down the chain, basically emphasizing that our dignity exists because we were created in God's image and likeness. We were willed by God, created by God, we're loved by God, and every human being shares in that, regardless of our sort of accident of birth or our abilities or whatever. That sort of metaphysical claim is what's essential about this encyclical, because if we can't keep in mind what's important and what's distinctive and what's essential about being human and having that claim on dignity, then we don't have an ability to say, well, why shouldn't we have a brain implant is tapped into AI and giving us all this information? Or why shouldn't we be having these sort of biohacking things and transhumanist, gobbledygook and all the rest? We recognizing this, and we can talk about this, recognizing how this leads us to an acceptance of our frailties and our limitations as well, because we're not afraid to shy away from that, because ultimately we all share in that relationship with God as our Father, as our Creator. That is the key. The key to unlocking the rest of the conversation about AI and nuclear weapons and all the rest that he gets into at the end.
Mhm. It's such a moment to talk about some of the abuses that we're seeing against human rights that I think would run afoul of Catholic social teaching and this encyclical particularly. One of the examples that I've seen recently, there is a Silicon Valley startup called Orchid, and Orchid claims to be the world's most advanced whole genome sequencing for embryos during IVF. So IVF already scans for a number of known conditions, but the brag of this startup is that it seeks to find and uncover a huge range of issues that even within the IVF community were not previously tested for. Things like celiac disease, type 1 diabetes, obesity, even IBS are things that embryos are being screened for. And the implication, this is such a moment for disability rights, and I know probably many of you on this webinar, maybe you have children or brothers and sisters who have what we would call disabilities. Like this is such a moment for us in pro-life to step up and advocate for the diversity and beauty of human life, and including people who have a variety of these conditions. But what do you think that the Pope and the Holy Father and the Church as a whole says about this idea that embryos should be discarded because they may have ultimately, have a disability?
Right. I mean, and this is where it's important to stress, like AI can supercharge this, but these trends were already happening, right? This is a sort of technocratic age that we live in, that it's all about optimization, and why would you punish someone with having a baby that isn't the most perfect specimen we can create in a lab somewhere? We're going to create 60 embryos and we'll find the one that has the highest propensity to be good at sports and to have a high IQ and to avoid depression. Why wouldn't you want that for your child, right? And I think this is where there's two things. One, obviously, the destruction of human embryos is a sort of moral injustice. What those have the capacity to become a human, just like we all started in that way. So obviously, there's a sort of direct offense against the human person, and the Pope mentions abortion and killing of the innocent as grave violations of our first fundamental right, which is a right to life. But then there's also the sort of indirect or the sort of secondary consequence of once you habituate yourself to thinking in this way, right? Where it's beyond just the destruction of the embryo, it's also, what is this saying about society? What is this conditioning us to be thinking of? Where it's no longer accepting a baby as a gift from God, and it's as a act of co-creation with our creator, right? But it's a purchasing a product through a consumer transaction in a way that is trying to guarantee against bad results. And so, if you have a baby who's born with a club foot, or who it has high rates of the things that you're talking about, and these other ways that were not perfect, now you feel like, hey, I want my money back or something. They like that. You almost want a warranty against it, because you're being conditioned to think of children as a product to be pursued rather than a gift to be received. And I think this is exactly what the Pope is warning us against. And obviously, this is not an IVF encyclical. There's plenty of threats against the human person that he's trying to warn us against. But this has the sense that in a world in which everything that can be optimized should be optimized, and that we should be sort of widowing ourselves of dependency and trying to be as hyper logical and efficient and trusting the machines to do everything as we can. We're losing that capacity to be tolerant of each other's weaknesses. And I think it's a particularly memorable example of this is when he's talking about sort of, I think, chatbots and sort of interacting with AI. And he says, you can look up the exact quote, but something to the effect of, the danger for here is not that you are going to confuse your AI, chat GPT console with a human person. It's that you're going to lose the desire to have a relationship with a human person because you're having your needs met emotionally, psychologically, sexually, in some cases, all these sort of ways that people are losing themselves in a parasocial relationship with AI is changing the nature of what it means to be in relationship. In the same way the IVF and embryonic screening are changing the nature of what it means to accept the gift of parenthood. This is what the Pope is seeing, what he's appropriately concerned about, and what he's trying to warn us against as we're entering this new era.
Hmm. Beautifully said. And I do want to tell everybody that we do have a Q&A feature on here. And so we can see your Q's and A's. There's a little button. Feel free to submit those and I'll kind of be looking at those and serve some of these up to Patrick. Um, Super interesting. I just want to say too, that it's a moment for us to pause, I think, as Catholics. And so many of us, we put our heads down and we're going about our way and we're kind of in our own vocation. But what a great opportunity for us to take a moment and a pause and do kind of an inventory of what's going on socially in our own lives. I want to talk about that for a minute. You touched on this, Patrick, about there's, of course, the overt abuses that come from this technocracy. What did you say? Technocracy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
technological, whatever. Yeah, this
yeah, the
rule by
technological.
this sort of, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the Tower of Babel. There are these like overt abuses against human life, but then there's this pervasive, creeping thing that happens to us, where in our desire to optimize everything that we do, and our use of these AI tools, that it's a creeping spiritual problem that that makes us start to look at life in a mechanistic way. What does the Holy Father teach us? And this is so beautiful that we're having this conversation, and the encyclical came out right after the feast, or right before the feast of the Holy Trinity, Solemnity of the Holy Trinity, because what the image of God, right, is a community of persons. So what does the church teach us about the authentic human experience and what it means to be in a community?
No, it's remarkable, and this is where again to kind of get back to where we started. People were saying, "Well, why didn't he talk more about sin or redemption?" In some respects, you would never have thought that you would need an encyclical to talk about how wonderful it is to be human, except for this age that we're entering into. And in a similar way, you would never have thought you would need a pope to say, hey, it's really important to have opportunities to get together and join together as community, to know each other as persons, to he has some ideas at the end about like finding ways to accompany young children, get them off screens when they're young, make sure that we're supporting them in the right way socially and communally. These things didn't need to be said 10, 20 years ago, but they do now. And it's essential for the church to be speaking in this register, both because of, I think, the growing sense that we've kind of gone too far with social media and screens and all the rest. But also, as you say, this sort of creeping reliance on intermediated reality, where it's so easy to sort of go to the toddler's birthday party, and rather than trying to strike up a conversation, you pull up your phone, and at least I'm calling myself out on this one. I do this,
Yeah.
right. You scroll and see like this is an interesting conversation, then chat about the weather, whatever. Those type of things where we can just sort of easily default into relying on technology to kind of like fill those holes in our lives, where you know the Pope is saying this is a warning sign that we're going to lose something really important and valuable if we're not paying attention to it. In the same way, he has, I think, my favorite line in the encyclical. Well, actually, this is hard to say. There's a lot of
Yeah.
great lines in this, but one of my favorite lines is when he's talking about, it's sort of like that old phrase, like to err is human, right? He says, like, for when a person makes a mistake, it's a chance for conversion, for redemption, for making amends, for growing. It can be a chance for us to kind of come to grips with where we've gone wrong. When an algorithm makes a mistake, it's just something that needs to be corrected in the alchemy of the code and the output of the spreadsheet or whatever else. That's not the same thing. And when we rely on algorithms and the sort of like technological mentality of like optimization and self-reliance and all these rest, we're losing the opportunity to either experience that own call the conversion for ourselves or to be that salt and light and that interaction with other people who might need someone else to show them a better way. So I just think that idea of like stressing how important it is to be vulnerable and to be in community. Again, you wouldn't have thought it would need to be said if you were talking, a half century ago or something. But this is why the church continues to speak in this way, with the encyclical being a sort of, the Pope in his mode as teacher, right? This is not totally infallible, but it's kind of like the next level down, where we're really supposed to grapple with this with as students, as with an assent of the will, to try to incorporate this into our own lives. And so I really hope that people have a chance to sit down with this. It is long, but it's so rich and so rewarding to get through.
Hmm. Hmm. On the whole, you said that too often our experience of being human is now mediated by technology. And I just had
Mm,
a beautiful conversation with one of our benefactors who is describing that witnessing this person witnessing their children parent, where now they're parenting and the phone is in the middle of there's the baby
mm,
and the phone and the parent. And how often I'm a mom of five, and I mean, I'm as much of a problem as anybody else in this. But what this person said was, when I was raising my babies, we didn't need any more entertainment than looking into the face of the baby. And it was
mhm.
just so beautiful to see the baby. And we sat there in the evening and looked at our baby and we're together.
Yeah.
Why do we need this? And that really sat with me. And it is so a part of the water. And it goes to, there's a theology of the body angle here too, to this, which is that we are gifts. Our body, we are, God created embodied souls, and that's what makes us human. We to talk about in this encyclical, it talks about man being made in the image and likeness of God. And that is, we're the at the end of creation, right? Like this is so what there's a lot of people out there saying we talked a little bit about transhumanism, but let's kind of zip back to that. The Pope provides he says that transhumanism is kind of it's a word to describe a lot of different movements. But at the end of the day, it's this idea that human beings can be optimized. What are, have you seen any examples of that in your work? And what, as Catholics, how should we view that?
Yeah, no, there's a lot there, and I think what the Pope, to kind of get to the phones example for a second, then we'll talk about transhumanism. I think what he's trying to stress is that he's channeling a little bit of Marshall McLuhan, right? Like the medium is the message, and there's this sense of what like we are what we eat in terms of our relationship with technology, and there is totally a way, and I think the Pope takes pains to say this: technology is not inherently moral or immoral. It is how we choose to put it to use. And there's plenty of things that can be used in socially destructive ways. And there's ways that, communicating with grandparents across the continent and sharing photos and all the rest, like that's a beautiful way of amplifying our relationships, right? And so like we don't want to become Luddites. And I think again, the people who are hoping for a Luddite encyclical were left disappointed, because that's not what this is. This is a recognizing the limits of technology. And part of where those limits come in is recognizing what technology can and can't do. What it can't do is efface vulnerability in the way that a lot of the transhumanists want to just perfect us. He even talks about like, some people are talking about like machine human hybrids, or sort of perfecting the human species. And I think, this raises all kinds of questions about like, what it means to have a natural death and all these sort of things. And just like we don't even have to go into now, but just this this sense of which the people who are pushing for this truly see our in our flesh, our body that we've been given as God, as something to be overcome, rather than something to be accepted in whatever weakness that it has. And the Pope in the start of that section, he's talking about how the the limits of our bodies are a sense in which like that is a recognition of our interdependence on each other, and that trying to seeing them as defects to be like try to be corrected or to try to be like erased away is in some respects, obviously we want people to have good health and live healthy lives and all that. But if you're seeing old age and vulnerability as a problem to be solved rather than as a burden to be sort of shared and supporting each other as we're all going through this in different stages of our journey in life, like that's the wrong mentality to have. And so acknowledging our own limitations is a start, is a feature, not a bug of being human. It helps us build those communities of interdependence rather than sort of this false idol of autonomous independence that we're not relying on anyone. We're just seeking perfection under our own
Mhm.
terms.
Yeah, it harkens back to that motif of the Tower of Babel and
Yep.
rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, right? Because one of the reasons that I wish I could quote Genesis here, but one of the reasons that the Lord allows the Tower of Babel to be toppled is that He sees that there's no limitations then that man is working to try to stop man's own limitations, but the limitations that we have are given to us by our createdness, right? And us being good humans and us being in right relationship with the Lord means accepting our limitations as created beings. So, really, really beautiful. I'm going to pop to one of our questions. So, we have a question from Michael from Minnesota who says, "Hello, you're an old friend, Patrick." He says, "Patrick, for those of us who are lay Catholics working in corporate America, what is it important for us to do within our spheres of influence in the workplace to push for Magnifica Humanitas in our workplaces, especially with regard to how AI is used at work?"
That's a great question. I think well, all the questions are great. I'm sure any of the other questions are great too. But I think it's a challenge because I obviously there is so much productivity and innovation and I think we've really just sort of scratched the surface in terms of what AI can do. You look at some of the medical technologies that are being advanced because of AI, and it is just truly miraculous. We're going to see so many gains from better cancer screening and better drugs and more tailored. I mean, there's so much potential that I'm generally most days pretty optimistic actually about AI, even though I think it'll probably kill my job at some point along the way, self-interestedly. So I want us to be careful to avoid the trap that the Pope warns us to avoid, to not fall into this idea that like there aren't tremendous things that can be all these tools, right? Whether it's the loom, whether it's the printing press, whether it's nuclear power, all have tremendous potential to benefit humanity. And I think AI can and will. I was in a self-driving car a couple weeks ago down in Austin, not far from you, and that's just an amazing piece of technology that's going to transform humanity in ways we can't even predict once it goes to scale. Those kind of opportunities are going to be amazing. So I don't want us to be afraid of pushing the envelope of can AI help me do my job better? I think where the Pope does stress is like we can't let AI be a full substitute, and I don't think it ever will. But there are some people who say, well, this will, if you listen to Elon Musk or somebody, AI is going to like take care of all the work and we're just going to be able to live off of universal basic income and no one's going to like that. I think is pretty silly economically speaking, but also the Pope says this is not a vision to aspire to. Man derives value from work. There's a dignity of work. There's a sense in which the parable of the talents, right? So all it is to say, I'm sort of filibustering a little bit here because I don't think there's a good answer. There's not one size fits all. It's going to be different from different workplaces, but thinking about where AI can help increase productivity and push the envelope of what's possible in moral and beautiful, exciting ways, that's all to the good. But remembering that we can't let it be a substitute for these human interactions, these seeing each other as frail, dependent, uh, sometimes frustrating, fellow brothers and sisters of God. I think that's probably where is going to be the most general advice for most people.
Mhm. It's so well said, and I think I just want to underscore that, the Pope did not come out and say that AI is all bad, and I think people were very curious whether he would. I will, just in my organizational practice here, one of the principles that I've tried to adhere to, and this is for me personally, my personal use of AI, is really to think about what are the questions that I'm outsourcing to AI. So there are some questions I think are really great use cases. For me, it's computational things, financial planning and things like that, with, under the right privacy frameworks. But then there's a type of question that really you think about, is this a question a machine should answer? Should I outsource my reasoning to a machine in this realm of moral reasoning? So really things relating to my relationship with other people, kind of asks on the ultimate question. Those are using AI to answer those kind of moral human questions, right? It feels in some sense idolatrous because it's worshiping the work of our own hands. It's asking, AI is human technology, right? It's the work, our own work. And so asking, going to the our statue that we've created and asking for answers on these ultimate human questions is like asking a calculator to decide for me whether or not something that the Lord asked us to decide.
No, I think that's exactly right. And this is where we've kind of skipped over the last section of the encyclical because it is so long and because he's covering so much ground. But and I do not pretend to be a foreign policy expert or an AI expert, so really just freelancing here. But he's talking about AI control of autonomous weapons and sort of this next age of warfare where you could have drones controlled by AI, targeting different and he really calls for keeping a human in the loop. But this is controversial among people who are really in this sphere because they say, look, computers are so much better. They're going to be able to weigh all these factors and like human error. We're just going to get rid of that. We're going to be real. And I think the Pope is asking us to think about what we lose when we cut out the human aspect of having someone to blame, frankly, if something goes wrong, or to have someone who is in charge, even if they're monitoring a complex system, to be able to know if something's going wrong, to be that sort of point person. If you're just saying, well, why did I get fired? And you say, well, the AI told me to, that's not a very satisfying answer. That's a sort of dereliction of your duty as an employer. And I think we're going to see that going forward. And, obviously this is not the same as warfare. It's thankfully a little less, but those kind of decisions where it's like, well, as a person, what are you owed, or what am I owed from my relationships to my employer, from my coworkers, and all the rest. I think when we're outsourcing some of those decisions that have real impact on people's lives, I think that's your point. Idolatrous. I think it's treating other people as tools and as widgets rather than treating them as being in a relationship with them. And so, I think this is where the Pope is trying, and I think this is going to be the big test or a big test of his teaching here, because there's plenty of people who don't see the virtue in that, right? They just want to be able to click the button and say, AI, find me my lowest performing 20% of workforce employees and write a compassionate seeming email and terminate them from that kind of stuff is going to be very tempting for a lot of companies. And I think that's what the Pope is trying to warn us against it. Again, plenty of insights to be gained, but without losing our humanity, without losing our sense of relational awareness.
Mhm. So beautiful. So Patrick, the Pope quotes J.R. Tolkien talking about building a civilization of love. That's a beautiful motif for the pro-life movement. Our organization is called the Catholic Pro-Life Community, and we do direct service to the poor and vulnerable. We do tremendous work on healing for people who have experienced abortions. We walk in accompaniment with women who are in need. And we are, I think, in this next era of leadership, going to build out a number of different offerings. But we know we don't call ourselves like a service organization. We call ourselves a community. What do you think? Do you think that's resonant with the Pope's encyclical? And what do you think? What else do you think that the Holy Father would say about the pro-life movement?
Yeah, I think this is really, first of all, yes, I think you're doing a great job. Before we even knew what this was about, like emphasizing that aspect of relational living and caring for each other as a community, not just sort of directly providing service, because I think that's where the pro-life movement as a whole needs to go. I also think it's great to have a pope who is quoting Tolkien and citing Schindler's List, Beethoven's Ninth, makes it mention Martin Luther King. I mean, there's like, as much as we all love Pope John Paul II and Pope Francis and Pope Benedict, all the having a pope who kind of knows some of our cultural references as Americans, I think it just will never get old to
So
me.
crazy.
Um,
Yeah, it's wild.
and so that's and appropriately so, right? Talking about when he's talking about Schindler's List, he's talking about the sort of finding beauty in the face of evil, right? And there's this sense of like, again, not losing sight of humanity even when so much is going wrong and or seemingly spiraling out of control, like finding that spark of what makes us human. Anyway, yeah, I think this encyclical really stresses the importance um, of that vision of build again subsidiarity, right? Where especially in a pro-life context, we would love strong families, but a lot of times when you're facing a crisis pregnancy, it's because dad's not in the picture or there's a lot going on at home, and so mom who's in that situation of like, what do I do? How can I think about adding another mouth to feed at the table? Needs the community around her to be that sort of airbag, right? That sort of like safety net in a way. And obviously, I would love to see the state doing more to support that too. But also, but it needs to be proactively led by groups like yourselves, building that connective fiber to connect mom to the material resources, but also just the mentorship and the support and the sense that like it's 7 p.m. and the kid's going, my baby's already crying, and how can I even think about having another one? Like, who can I call? And knowing that there's somebody who can listen to. I think those type of evangelization really is it's witness, it's accompaniment, it's so important for the work of the brotherhood movement to be able to, and we've all always done this, but I think it's essentially important now. I think that's what a community love can and should look like. And so, oh, that's I think the most immediate need. But then also beyond that, the sort of idea of how can we support more families to be in the position to welcome a new baby, right? And I think, as again, we talked about low birth rates a little bit, but just like the decline in family formation across the board, where fewer people are getting married, fewer people are having kids, that fewer people feeling like they know what their life is about. For the pro-life community, for the church as a whole, to be able to offer an example of finding commitment, finding love, finding belonging in a marriage, and in the domestic church at home, in a church community at large. I think, again, that's how they'll know that we're Christians, right? In the words of the song, and that's going to be important. As with every iteration of AI getting better and better, it's going to be more important for us to be able to showcase that, and that's what the encyclical I think is trying to tell us.
Hmm. There was a woman who came into our office. For those not familiar with our organization, we do have a pregnancy resource center here in our office, which is so lovely to be in accompaniment with women every day. Even though that's not all we do, we get to have interaction with these women in need, and it really informs how we talk about things. It informs what Pope Leo calls our evangelical language. But this woman last week came in, and it was the second time that she had been using our services, so her second pregnancy, where she needed resources. And the thing that was so beautiful about it was not that she was given diapers and not that she was given medical care, and all those things were true, but it became apparent in my personal interaction with her that the main reason that she came back was because our whole group was so affirming of her and her decision to have this baby. And so there was joy, there were hugs. We were so grateful to welcome her back. And I told her, I said, I'm so happy for you. Thank you for having this child. Thank you for bringing another child into the world, to this community. And she just said, you have no idea how good it is for me to hear that. And it's so tempting in the pro-life movement to get these big ideas and these big plans, and I do think the Lord wants those, and he certainly gives them to me, and I do think he blesses us with those big and grand plans, but it's those small radical acts of love, right, in the vein of Saint Therese, that we're really called to do. And I wonder if you could meditate on that, Patrick, kind of to close us out, just to end here, around at 12:45. But close us out on like, what do we take from this as people who are pro-life in our kind of cultural commitments, but also that are pro-life personally? What does it mean to live out this civilization of love in our daily lives?
I think you just answered it. I don't have anything to add to that. I think let me back into that. I think one thing, kind of getting back to the conversation we had about subsidiarity earlier, and this sense that the Pope is really, I think I've got so many thoughts. I'm trying to cram into one answer here. I think one tendency that the Pope is trying to encourage us to break beyond is to think of this as just a individualistic effort, right? That is where it all starts, where it comes back down to. I think it is that relationship of love that you're talking about, that sort of interpersonal dynamic does that is ultimately how people's hearts and minds get changed. So like I think that has to be the core of what we do. But it can't just be that, because I think where we engaging in society, and both, and he takes pains to say this is not just talking about the government, but also these big, tech companies and sort of multinational organizations as well, is to be thinking about ways in which families themselves, and here, again, we can think about in the pro-life context, especially unborn babies, but kids overall are incredibly vulnerable to these social changes. I think he says that they're fragile, as against something about like the technological and social changes that are primarily they hit the family first, because that is where we are at our most intimate, our most vulnerable, our most our that children obviously have no other, and if the family breaks down, there's very little society can do to kind of put that back together. And so if we're treating that as this sort of fundamental cell, and um the building block of a society that can flourish, I think obviously starts with the personal, but also has to go political too, to be stressing to our elected representatives, to our business leaders, our community members, to the importance of recognizing that parents, especially pregnant moms, are bearing burdens that empty nesters and people who haven't had kids are never going to aren't bearing, and that we need to find ways of sort of shouldering that in a way of solidarity. Again, not overstepping, recognizing subsidiarity, trying to capacitate where that can work, but realizing that it's that two hand, that both and approach of recognizing, yes, leading in love, meeting in charity, offering mercy and justice, all the rest in our in the direct work that we do, but also thinking broadly, whether it's globally as the Pope is doing, or nationally or locally, whatever that happens to be, but thinking about how we can be changing systems to help get kids off of tech early in life, or to help parents feel like they're less alone in the burdens that they're taking, whether that's they're taking on, whether that's pregnancy or beyond. Burying that and having that be the vision, that what it means to be human, what it means to be Catholic, what it means to be a person of faith as we're entering into this technological age. I think that is what I hope that people will take out of this encyclical.
Mhm. That's so great. Patrick, thank you so, so much. And thank you all with your Q&As. I'm sorry we didn't have time to get to all of them, but I hope this is the beginning of many conversations that you will have and that we will have with you here in the Catholic pro-life community. Thank you for being involved in our movement and our work. As always, shoot me or an email if you want to be more involved as a volunteer or in any other capacity. So grateful for you, Patrick. Thank you to our co-sponsors, Young Catholic Professionals, all the members of the Diocese of Dallas that were on today. Thank you. It means so much to us. And for everybody, for Ethics and Public Policy Center, thank you guys. God bless you all, and go out and be builders of the civilization of love. God bless. Thank you.